Hello, my name is Lucas, and this is a bit of lit. It is day 19 for Vlogmas, and it is time to end our little read-along thing for Lord of the Rings. This is part 6 of 6, the second half of The Return of the King, the end of the Third Age. It's following Sam, who we last saw joyous that Frodo was still alive. However, he was being taken away by orcs. And Sam was determined that he is needed by his master far more than than Elrond and Gandalf need him to complete the mission, because Sam took the ring, but he cares deeply for his master far more. And it's, he couldn't get here without Frodo, just like Frodo could not get anywhere, could not get there without Sam. And, here, Sam, my boy, proves himself again and again. Truly incredible. He's just amazing in this chapter, or this whole thing. And you know what? So is Frodo, because Sam goes to save Frodo, and fortunately for him, all the orcs have had a fight with each other, and they've destroyed their own group of warriors by fighting with each other, which frees him up to get in and save Frodo. But then he has a conversation with Frodo, and it's time for him to give the ring. And as it says, now it had come to it. Sam felt reluctant to give up the ring and burden his master with it again. We do sort of see just before this that Sam has all these great visions of himself being a warrior and doing all these great things with his newfound power with the ring. And he sort of tosses it aside and says, no, not for me. And of course, the wording there is key, because he's more concerned about burdening Frodo than giving it up. And again, this comes right after he has decided those are just fantasies, basically. And yeah. So then I've got this other quote here. Sam and Frodo are deciding what to do. They're trying to feed each other, or Sam is trying to feed Frodo, and he says, "Not till you've had a mouth." Frodo says to Sam that he needs to take care of himself too. "Not till you've had a mouthful, Sam," said Frodo. "I won't budge. Here, take this elven cake and drink that last drop in your bottle. The whole thing is quite hopeless, so it's no good worrying about tomorrow. It probably won't come." Frodo, by this point, he's been stabbed. He's been, hit by Shelob. He's been tossed around. He's been just beat up and carried the ring for a very long time. Not to mention just having the ring in his presence for probably most of his life, but in his possession for nearly 20 years by this point. And with this last sort of climactic year and a half that he's been through, up to 2 years, I suppose, it's just been very difficult for him. He's lost hope, and yet we don't see him give up. He's still willing to go, but he doesn't really have anything in him. Anyway, they have to make it out, so they dress up, and they're on their way. And we get this Frodo is just destitute, man. He's just, "Do you remember that bit of rabbit, Mr. Frodo," he said, "and our place under the warm bank in Captain Faramir's country, the day I saw an oliphant?" "No, I am afraid not, Sam," said Frodo. "At least, I know that such things happened, but I cannot see them. No taste of food, no feel of water, no sound of wind, no memory of tree or grass or flower, no image of moon or star are left to me. I am naked in the dark, Sam, and there is no veil between me and the wheel of fire. I begin to see it even with my waking eyes, and all else fades." He is losing it. And I just feel so bad for him. I mean, like, people give Frodo a lot of crap because, I think jokingly, of course, for not being able to finish the deed, but he has been suffering probably the most. I mean, Sam is up there with him, of course. Make no mistake, Merry and Pippin have been through their own suffering, Aragorn and Gandalf too, but Frodo has been the ring bearer for almost the entire journey. And he's the one who's getting tossed around and stabbed and betrayed by Gollum, who will come back, of course, and serve his duty to the destruction of the ring when they get to the cracks of Mount Doom, and Frodo decides to put the ring on to keep it for himself. He's failed, and I love that. People fail all the time with the best intentions. Even when they've given up hope and keep going on, they still fail. And that's why I love Frodo, okay? People who go on and try to do great things and have the best intentions and want to do what's right, just like Frodo. Even though he's given up, he's basically a zombie of some sort, just kind of trudging along because he has to, because the fate of the world depends on him. He is but a hobbit, okay? He is a simple folk. He is a humble folk and unassuming, and the entire world rests on his shoulders with the help of Sam, thankfully, to lighten the load. But he fails, and I don't blame him. It happens. There's no reward for failure, of course, but he had a tough going, So anyway, that's my little spiel on why Frodo is excellent and better than Sam, in my mind. I mean, Sam is, of course, it's basically 1A, 1B. It's not like one is actually better. They're both great. But before we get to the cracks of Mount Doom, I would like to quote a few more amazing pieces, extremely well written. I mean, really, it's just the tenor of the writing is so, the timbre, just pitch perfect. A little bit later, we've got Sam, who is on the other side of things. He has not really given up hope. He sees a hopeless cause, and he is still fighting for his master and for the fate of the world, and Rose, of course, even though he's not with her yet. "Now for it, now for the last gasp," said Sam as he struggled to his feet. He bent over Frodo, rousing him gently. Frodo groaned, but with a great effort of will he staggered up, and then he fell upon his knees again. He raised his eyes with difficulty to the dark slopes of Mount Doom towering above him, and then pitifully began to crawl forwards on his hands. Sam looked at him and wept in his heart, but no tears came to his dry and stinging eyes. I'd said I'd carry him if it broke my back," he muttered, "and I will. Come, Mr. Frodo," he cried. "I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you, and it as well. So up you get. Come on, Mr. Frodo, dear. Sam will give you a ride. Just tell him where to go, and he'll go." He's so good. I love him. Who doesn't want a Sam in their life? Who doesn't want to be Sam, okay? If you don't, then you're a little bit crazy, I think. Anyway. There is another part, actually, that I want to quote that happens before this, and I just happened to forget it. Okay, here we go. Frodo sighed and was asleep almost before the words were spoken. Sam struggled with his own weariness, and he took Frodo's hand, and there he sat silent till deep night fell. Then at last, to keep himself awake, he crawled from the hiding place and looked out. The land seemed full of creaking and cracking and sly noises, but there was no sound of voice or of foot. Far above the Ephel Duath, in the west, the night sky was still dim and pale. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. His song in the tower had been defiance rather than hope, for then he was thinking of himself. Now, for a moment, his own fate and even his master's ceased to trouble him. He crawled back into the brambles and laid himself by Frodo's side, and putting away all fear, he cast himself into a deep, untroubled sleep. Now, this comes a little bit before, in the chapter before, that moment where they're right at the base of the mountain, and they've been trying to climb up, and Sam decides, I can't carry the ring for you, but I can carry you, which just fills me with so much joy and happiness that Sam is so excellent. But this is sort of his mindset. He sees this white star, which gives him hope. Anyway, they go up, and Gollum shows his ugly head, and of course that causes all kinds of problems because Gollum is there to take the ring back and kill them, but Frodo does not want that, and Sam of course doesn't want that either. Gollum bites Frodo's finger off and happens to get the ring back, but he falls down into the pits of fire of Mount Doom, and everything is destroyed, and the day is saved, and our heroes did it, thanks to Gollum, surprisingly, and I think that's excellent. He does sort of redeem himself through his own selfishness, through his own warped mind, and then there's sort of the denouement, the everything's calming down. Aragorn becomes king, and the steward is now Faramir, and Sauron has escaped because Fangorn let him go. The crew finds Sauron, and they try to convince him, please, let us, here we go. On the 6th day since their parting from the king, they journeyed through a wood, climbing down from the hills at the feet of the misty mountains that now marched on their right hand. As they came out again into the open country at sundown, they overtook an old man leaning on a staff, and he was clothed in rags of gray or dirty white. And at his heels went another beggar, slouching and whining. What I think is really interesting here is that before, Sauron had this indescribable, indecipherable rainbow sort of cloak that changed all the time, and now it's just dirty, old, white and gray rags. Anyway, they let him go. I don't really get it personally. I feel like he's a war criminal. That's just my thoughts. But they let him go. All right, that's fine. And it turns out, unfortunately, Sauron has found interest in the South Farthing, where Hobbiton is, where the Shire is, and he's trying to take control, and that's where we get the scouring of the Shire. Now, I know some people don't really like that chapter. I do, because I think it is a great way to show that there are rippling effects and repercussions from these horrible wars that can affect even the most unlikely of places, and that includes the Shire. And my girlfriend just got home. Hello. Okay. Anyway, they happen to manage that, and Frodo has been filling in there and back again with the rest of the story of the ring. And Frodo wrote, "The Downfall of the Lord of the Rings and the Return of the King, as seen by the little people, being the memoirs of Bilbo and Frodo of the Shire, supplemented by the accounts of their friends and the learning of the wise, together with extracts from books of lore translated by Bilbo and Rivendell." And then we get Frodo's goodbye shortly after, because he is, yeah, he can't be there anymore. He's seen so much and been so hurt, and he can't be happy with where he was, the Shire anymore. He can't find himself comfortable, and because he's sort of been so damaged, and so he goes off to the West Havens, much to the dismay of Sam Wise Gamgee. But it's a choice he had to make. The Shire wasn't the same for him anymore after everything he'd been through, all the torment and suffering and all that stuff, and it's very emotional. And they go off, and so that he can go to Rivendell with Gandalf, who has decided, "I'm no longer here for this age. I was the opponent of Sauron, and now my time has come. I will go to the Grey Havens as well." He doesn't really help with the scouring of the Shire either, because it's not for him to move the pieces in place anymore. His job is done. And it's up to them to be self-determined and handle it. But Sam was now sorrowful at heart, and it seemed to him that if the parting would be bitter, more grievous still would be the long road home. But even as they stood there, and the elves were going aboard, and all was being made ready to depart, up rode Merry and Pippin in great haste, and amid his tears Pippin laughed. "You tried to give us the slip once before, and failed, Frodo," he said. "This time you have nearly succeeded, but you have failed again. It was not Sam, though, that gave you away this time, but Gandalf himself." "Yes," said Gandalf, "for it will be better to ride back three together than one alone. Well, here at last, dear friends, on the shores of the sea, comes the end of our fellowship in Middle-earth. Go in peace. I will not say, do not weep, for not all tears are an evil." Then Frodo kissed Merry and Pippin, and last of all Sam, and went aboard, and the sails were drawn up, and the wind blew, and slowly the ship slipped away down the long grey firth, and the light of the glass of Galadriel that Frodo bore glimmered and was lost, and the ship went out into the high sea and passed on into the west, until at last on a night of rain Frodo smelled a sweet fragrance on the air, and heard the sound of singing that came over the water. And then it seemed to him that as in his dream in the house of Bombadil, the grey rain curtain turned all to silver glass and was rolled back, and he beheld white shores, and beyond them a far green country under a swift sunrise. But to Sam the evening deepened to darkness as he stood at the haven, and as he looked at the grey sea he saw only a shadow on the waters that was soon lost in the west. There still he stood far into the night, hearing only the sigh and murmur of the waves on the shore of Middle-earth. And the sound of them sank deep into his heart. Beside him stood Merry and Pippin, and they were silent. And I've been reading a lot. There's just a little bit left, because this is the last page. Sam goes home, and he sees his wife and his kids, and we'll just say it. At last the three companions turned away, and never again looking back they rode slowly homewards, and they spoke no word to one another until they came back to the Shire, but each had great comfort in his friends on the long grey road. At last they rode over the downs and took the east road, and then Merry and Pippin rode on to Buckland, and already they were singing again as they went. But Sam turned to Bywater, and so came back up the hill, as day was ending once more, and he went on, and there was yellow light and fire within, and the evening meal was ready, and he was expected, and Rose drew him in, and set him in his chair, and put little Eleanor upon his lap. He drew a deep breath. "Well, I'm back," he said.